Shipyards are a vital part of any galactic war machine, not only for building new ships, but for performing refits, post-combat repairs, and even routine maintenance. The Empire created perhaps thousands of mobile shipyards, like the Black 15 facility, to perform the latter functions, but major shipbuilding planets have no substitute and are extraordinarily important. Unsurprisingly, we see planets like Fondor, Bilbringi, Mon Cala, Corellia, and Kuat rise to galactic prominence because of their powerful shipyards, while other major planets like Coruscant create their own installations. So, the thing about shipyards and the topic of today's video is that they're very, very difficult to capture, especially with the most important assets intact. This is something Jacen Solo learned as he assaulted Fondor, which had declared neutrality and left the Galactic Alliance during the Second Galactic Civil War. Planets like Fondor are not valuable without their orbital facilities. I mean, Fondor is basically a polluted garbage pit. It's the facilities in orbit that people stay for. Facilities which are usually staffed by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of workers. It's almost like an entirely second planet that you have to take over, which presents a variety of difficulties. First off, to hold a shipyard, conventional wisdom states that you also have to capture the planet itself. So when talking about a major world like Fondor or Corellia or Kuat, this involves bypassing or destroying planetary shields and launching a prolonged ground invasion. If you don't take over the planet, then you risk them pointing a ground-based turbo laser at the shipyards or just generally organizing some sort of insurrection. So the shipyards make all of this more difficult because not only do you have to invade on planet, but you also have to take the shipyards themselves. This means the attack will take a lot more time, or you'll need double the assets so you can accomplish both objectives simultaneously. It's also worth noting that orbital facilities were often spread out. During the attack on Fondor, Jacen's plan was to take each structure one by one. And even with hundreds of thousands of troops, it was anticipated that this would take an extremely long time. Prolonged invasions of this sort are problematic, mostly because you've got a bunch of assets tied up in a single place and the enemy can take advantage of that, or they can plan a counterattack. If you are targeting shipyards or other important assets like a galactic capital, it's very unlikely that your enemy will allow you to attack without any sort of retribution. And your ships have to stay there, perhaps weathering several battles. And even if you manage to capture all of the assets perfectly, it will still be a long time until the planet can defend itself. But there's more. Aside from the defending fleet, which will usually be significant and involve, if needed, half-completed ships, shipyards themselves will usually have internal security systems. What's more, because ships and the facilities are so valuable, there is a serious risk of the faction underseas scuttling their assets to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. This wasn't a serious risk for Fondor because the planet was held by its own government, which wouldn't destroy the one thing that made it galactically relevant. However, even in that case, Jacen was worried about workers sabotaging the station. His strategy, which again was to take the facility piece by piece, would have allowed a lot of time for sabotage as well. Other military options include a blockade, which the GA tried to do around Corellia, but it's very difficult to accomplish this over a long period of time, especially in the middle of a war. Another option is to mine the space around a planet, which sort of acts as a blockade in and of itself, while also negotiating for a peaceful surrender of the assets. But there are also ways to neutralize that tactic. And because of the general difficulty of taking a shipyard by military force, I'd argue that it was much more common for a faction to simply destroy or neutralize their enemy's production facilities. In New Canon, for example, the New Republic was satisfied with breaking the Kuat orbital ring after weeks of prolonged fighting. In Legends, plans to capture the Empire's major shipyards were non-feasible, and they were usually satisfied instead with launching raids or bombing attacks. There is, however, one way that shipyard captures are possible, but they rely on several things coming together. Primarily, there has to be a sufficient divide between between the faction currently controlling the shipyard and the organization or planet which physically controls it, i.e. which supplies the workers and the defensive systems. On top of this, the shipyard also has to have a reason to go neutral or join the opposing faction. Now, this probably doesn't make sense, but essentially we're talking about negotiation, and a good example is the taking of Kuat in Star Wars Legends. The New Republic first neutralized the protective fleet and essentially forced KDY, which operated the shipyard, into surrendering. KDY then helped oust the Empire and voluntarily changed sides. If the Empire hadn't been stretched so thin and had placed more troops on the stations, this never would have been possible. But even in this perfect example, the shipyards themselves were partially scuttled by the Empire, who didn't want them to follow into New Republic hands, and they were offline for quite some time, perhaps years. Even had they not been scuttled, the New Republic would have had to find new sources of resources and set up all the logistics that goes into such a crazy operation. Other shipyards like Corellia would seek independence on their own if given the opportunity, and although they wouldn't be captured per se, if the system was brought into your greater government, ships could be requisitioned as a form of tax or mandatory asset production. But overreach by the GA in that respect also caused Corellia to start the Second Galactic Civil War, so it's certainly not the same as owning the shipyard yourself. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I didn't say the word shipyards too many times. Regardless, if you have something you'd like me to talk about in the future, a question, or a point of discussion, make sure to leave it down below, and while you're there, also drop a like and subscribe with notifications on if you haven't already. Today's hashtag AskEck question comes from Dylan James Locke, who asks about the ship on the cover of Star Wars The New Jedi Order Dark Tide 2 Rune. This is a great question. The Dark Tide duology was originally meant to be a trilogy, and the ship on the cover would have appeared in Book 3, so that's a little odd, but yeah, it would have been something like a Lucrehulk class, some sort of freighter, and it was known specifically as the Lost Hope. Thank you for asking. If you guys have something you'd like me to address, leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck. Watch to the end of all my videos, and maybe you'll see your own question answered. Anyway, until next time guys, this has been EckhartsLadder. As always, be safe, get your pet spayed and neutered, and may the Force be with you.